Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. We're live? We're live. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to this symposium. I know it's during the week, and you have made an effort. Probably, it's London. So I want to just start by welcoming you all to the symposium of the art of being civic. Yesterday we had a really interesting breadth of presentations that ranged from activists talking to academics to practitioners of different disciplines. I don't think there was a similar discipline in the whole day. They were kind of very wide in terms of the disciplines that were here. I also would like to do some thanks. I would really like to thank Anna and Uma University and the School of Architecture for supporting and collaborating with us on this wonderful event. And also I'd like to thank the Public Works team for having worked so tirelessly on getting it all together, and our wonderful Erasmus exchange students from Italy have been forcing through through lots of making bubbles like this, and this is what we call skill in public works. And also I want to thank Andy and Luma who have worked really hard with me to kind of bring this to you. What I'm going to do just really, and I'm sorry if you came yesterday as well, when we looked at the names there were very different people today and yesterday, so we thought we'll do the introductions again, so feel free to fall asleep if you've heard this before, if you want to hear it again because it was so great. But either way, I'm going to do the same thing again. And I'm going to start by just saying a little bit about the journey that Public Works has taken to this point of where we think we've got to now with the Civic University. So since 2004, Public Works has been involved in working with and trying to understand the agency of participatory art projects. Sometimes, of course, we really did conceive them as what constitutes them as art, but a lot of the time the participations were the things that foregrounded it for us. And also this allowed us to explore quite playful methods of engagement and the impact we could kind of make as practitioners or spatial practitioners around kind of the issues around civil society's rights to the city, to public space and land. So the projects that we have been doing, and mainly recently, they obviously very much blur between art, participatory art practice and architecture and urbanism, if you like. And they kind of they really try to explore what is civic, hence the title of the symposium, and how we can tactically or strategically look at ways to work with community groups or work with civil society to gain agency for and with them in the city and the built environment. And nowadays we mainly initiate longer-term projects. I'll speak later when I talk on the panel on situated learning about why we kind of started to make this decision, which is more precarious for us financially because we have to fund the projects. But in a way, these longer-term commitments to certain places was really important. So all of this has led us through journeys and methods which has brought us to the Civic University So really a platform which Andy will talk about in more detail, but more a platform for civic education or civic learning away from disciplinary constraints and disciplinary values that we've all kind of had studied in or have value systems fed to us within. So what that is and what can that be and what can that get you, I think is something we're trying to explore with that. And so with that, I hand over to Andy to tell, oh, Anna, actually, sorry, we did it slightly differently yesterday. But just one thing before I do that, and that's, I know Andy will tell you a little bit more, but the format of today, I know that it's a symposium type format when, you know, we're trying to do pedagogical experimentation, but Andy will explain what we've been doing up to this point, and within the panels we've tried to mix it so there is a practitioner, an academic, and an activist or somebody working on the ground. So kind of that, we're testing that in a way. But I leave that to Andy a little bit later. And now I'd like to invite Anna Bettencourt to the... Oh, yeah. Okay.
See you. Just click it on. And if you want to use the clicker again? Or do you want to use the...
Oh, I just, yeah.
Sure.
Thank you. Well, welcome and welcome back for those that were here yesterday. It's really wonderful to be here. To everybody here in London, and also to those spectators that are watching us via live streaming at Umeå at the School of Architecture, also welcome. Friends, family, colleagues, it's great that you're here. And yesterday was a very successful, wonderful day, amazing discussions, so we continue today. I would be brief, but I would like to say very short things. Firstly, I, of course, would like to thank you, Public Works, all of the team, for the initiative, for the amazing job you have done, and for making it possible. So, big thanks. I also would like to thank the work of the students at UMA that is exhibited outside, and of course there are other student work that is also great, exhibit outside, but I think it's also wonderful to be able to have Umeå in London and London in Umeå, to kind of expand and shrink distances in the time of the post-Brexit area here in London. This is part of an ongoing research at Umeå University, at UMA School of Architecture, and for us these concerns are really very important. They are not only part of our curriculum, the agenda, the projects that we are working and carried out at the master's level. We have some of the members of Public Works here as members of staff at UMA, but we also consider that these are not only critical issues and concerns, but they are critical in the sense not only of critique, but critical in the sense of urgency. The urgency to develop alternative models of education, but then the urgency to actually address issues that we are living with, all of us, in our everyday lives in contemporary cities. How to raise the issue of our concerns in engagement in the city making, and to contradict the terrible effects of gentrification, privatization, and corporatization. And I think these are concerns that many of us are sharing. What is important with this two-day symposium, despite the format of the symposium, what we've been trying is really to, how can we share experiences, tools, tactics, strategies, how can we learn from each other? And I think yesterday we also had an amazing talk at the end of the day about Latin America and how some projects and experiences in Latin America actually can contribute very strongly to the processes that we are living currently in many cities in Europe. And I thought that was an amazing and very fruitful presentation for us. I would like just to briefly end with two things that are, for me, very important to keep in mind throughout this day. And I will take a point of departure from Bell Hooks that defines in her book, Teaching to Transgress, the classroom as the location of possibilities and urges us to collectively imagine ways to move beyond boundaries, to transgress in the labor for freedom. And I think that's the most important. How do we become democratic educators? I would like to resonate with Hooks' open call for education as the practice of freedom and to create communities of resistance. A framework for action in the construction of spaces of commons and alternative modes of production, dissemination of knowledge to the civil society. And just to end, this is an image from a dear friend and colleague, Oriana Elizaba from Barcelona. She works with an art activist collective called En Medio, in between arts, politics, between arts, media, and politics and technology. And this is an image from so-called sit-ins for right for housing that started around 2014, but that also led largely to the learning of new ways of practicing together, protesting, taking over the public realm in a way, in this case it was for right for housing, and this very much became also an embodied knowledge that had a large influence in the 15M movement later on, and also in the camps that were taking over many squares in all cities, major cities in Spain, as you might be aware of. And I just think that there are similar struggles we have seen in the past years, Taksim Square and many other places where actually physical spaces become the location for a much larger issue that is a claim for representation, for democratic representation. These collectives at the moment are also developing alternative ways of education and how to work with these issues and to share it. And they are sharing to Brazil, to Turkey, across the planet. And I think this is just a little starting point where we can see ourselves as something that can start growing and travel and cross many places. So we are in London, but we are also in UMA, and I hope many of you travel with what you bring from today to other places. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, welcome back to those who were here yesterday. I'm Andy, I'm one member of Public Works. Today you'll meet a few other members. We're all going to try and take turns in introducing panels. My job today is to kind of introduce what we've been doing so far as Public Works, as the Civic University, and also try and establish the context for why we're having this symposium and why it's relevant. So first of all, pick up my notes. The first iteration of the Civic University began in 2014 whilst at the Royal College of Art. Taking over a temporary use space in Wembley, we were commissioned by Brent Council to set up a civic classroom as part of the pilot Civic University. Each student set up a department and started to run classes, inviting experts and holding events all open to the public for free. testing methods of collaborative city planning and the sharing of local knowledge, all with the intention of delivering a co-produced urban framework for Wembley. These ideas of situated learning, utilising local knowledge, and developing projects which explored architecture's relationship to the civil society are also present across public works projects. As Taranj alluded earlier, we are participants and initiators in long-term projects across London. The Old Tower Mill Wildlife Garden in Deptford, which Owen spoke about yesterday, Loughborough Farm and the LJ Works project, which Anthea Massey spoke about yesterday, based in Loughborough Junction. Rurban, of which Doina will speak on today, and also this is the kind of a sister project with Public Works in Hackney Wick. And also the Interact Hub on the Roman Road. Each site being both the site of the project, but also a space of learning, where knowledge is produced and shared most directly. Leading us to question, what is education's role within these localities, and how could a new model of education help resource communities whilst providing a rich learning environment for students? The Civic University is a pedagogical experiment drawing together this network and testing alternative modes of knowledge transfer at work in the city, challenging traditional and institutional restrictions with an interdisciplinary approach to study. Teaching and learning in the Civic University is symbiotic. By situating its curriculum within live projects, it can mutually provide a support structure back to local communities, the sites they occupy, and the individuals enrolled. The Civic University draws together a network of local and international civic classrooms, physical spaces situated in different areas of the city, where knowledge about hands-on city making is produced, disseminated on various topics, from housing to our high streets, our community gardens, parks, and other urban spaces. Civic classrooms are already set up across London with the potential to grow to other sites, forming new partnerships and supporting existing neighbourhood initiatives. A number of the MA students from Sweden have been working with this approach, negotiating spaces in Umeå as civic classrooms, using these spaces to host the public, hold debates, conversations, and build participation in the future urban environment. There is an exhibition of these spaces outside, which would encourage you to engage with during the coffee break. This project here is Infuga, which is using a disused or a vacant space in a shopping mall to run a project called Room for Allah, a space where you can wait and meet people in the city without needing to consume. Whilst also students from Sheffield University, Sheffield School of Architecture, and the eCoder Co-Designing Resilience Programme have helped to establish an online platform and network for the future Civic University, all of which, again, is in the exhibition next door. Starting in January 2018, our residency here at Tate Exchange began. 2018? 17, sorry. Talking about the past now. And it has been the first test for the Civic University and our extended network of friends and projects. An emerging curriculum was driven by the needs and desires of local projects, tackling issues of access to land, local ecology, management of urban spaces, as well as exploring what it really means to be a citizen in the UK through a series of masterclasses. Whilst Taranj has also been working with School 21, a London-based secondary school, to explore Year 9 students' relationship with their built environment. Their exhibition of models is part of a wider Civic University project, reimagining underutilised spaces in the neighbourhood. The Civic University builds on a rich tradition of artist-led initiatives, reimagining educational models, and is reflected in our archive of alternative schools, which we launched here in February. Our incomplete archive can be found outside. and we've already had a few contributions from yesterday, but we'd welcome even more contributions to expand this archive. And our thanks must also go to Professor Robert Mull, whose knowledge and insight into organisational structures of institutions has been invaluable. And our ongoing collaboration will seek to bring the Civic University forward as a new educational programme in its next iteration. All of which has led us to today, The Art of Being Civic. This two-day symposium aims to bring together activists, artists, academics and architects to discuss pedagogies that enable civil society's actions towards collective social change. The symposium was split into 2 days: Civic, which we explored yesterday, exploring the role of civil society in relation to contemporary city making, and Education, focusing on pedagogy, understanding how and by whom knowledge is produced, who sanctions it, and how it is distributed and accumulated, and what role the environments have in shaping education. The aim is to highlight and test the intersections of city making, the civil society, and education, and critically reflect on the current limitations of both institutions, both academic and governmental, and more broadly to help develop the next stage and the next steps for the Civic University. Today, we have 3 panels, bringing together a multitude of perspectives on education. With a broad range of voices, we seek to share lessons from our different contexts, backgrounds, and projects to understand education's key role in city making. Our first panel speaks on knowledge commons, understanding how open and free access to knowledge can support progress, be it in the built environment, society, or cultures, along with the structures which support and limit it. This is followed by a panel discussion around situated learning, with 3 views on how being situated offers a different perspective on who learns and what for, and what purpose, with examples from London and the global context. Finally, we end the 2-day symposium with a panel discussion on other settings for learning. Taking examples from across the UK, we seek to expand the notion of the civic classroom and the role of context on different forms of learning. And finally, to mention, I didn't mention this enough yesterday, so I'll mention it again. As well as we're currently live streaming to the University of Umeå, we're also tweeting throughout the day, so if you want to share the live stream link, follow us, which is at Public Works UK, and then you can retweet the links. And we'll also, if you want to contribute to the conversation via Twitter, use the hashtag #ArtofCivic. I'd now like to invite Hester to introduce our first panel of speakers, and I'll quickly try and load the next presentations.
So our first presentation is about knowledge commons. Our relationship with knowledge is a key consideration when questioning the nature of education. Knowledge commons promote a culture of collaboration through open access to ideas, challenging their commodification through the use of intellectual property and copyright. This radically changes the agency of the learner, empowering the student to take ownership of an idea, allowing it to grow and evolve in response to real-life situations. To discuss this exciting and highly challenging topic, we have Doina Petku, co-founder of Atelier Architecture Autogérie, AAA, a professional organisation which conducts action and research on participatory urbanism and architecture, involving local residents in self-managing projects to promote projects in their neighbourhood. Doina is Professor of Architecture and Design Activism at the University of Sheffield. Her cross-disciplinary research addresses questions in architecture and urban planning, focusing on issues of participation and the relationship between co-production and resilience. Following her will be Wilhelm Hoffmann. who is interested in how boundaries of expertise are negotiated and in intersituationalized particularly in the competition between research fields, lay and local knowledge, and how our expertise is materialized in tests or formalized in protocol. Wilhelm Hofman is a senior lecturer of Science and Technology Studies at Radboud University, Nijmegen in the Netherlands, an associate member of the Centre for Science, Knowledge and Policy, SKAPE, at Edinburgh University. And then finally, we have Marcus Clausen. His work focuses on developing and fostering sustainable and resilient urban communities. As a co-initiator of a Berlin urban garden, he runs various agricultural and environmental and participatory urban projects. His work focuses on how we can co-create sustainable city futures. So I would now like to invite Doina to start the discussion.
I think it normally, because the presentation mirrors, so is this fine?
Yeah, but is it possible to have the presenter tools, my notes?
Sorry, I'm just going to... Sorry.
I give time and you get 20 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Helen.
So,
I'll keep watching you.
And also, if you want to just click through, just use it.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'm representing a collective practice called Atelier d'Architecture Autogérée, as well as my partner who couldn't attend this lecture, and I might explain at the end why and what it takes to do such projects. The question of commons, I feel responsible to introduce it a little bit because I'm the first speaker on this panel about commons, and we all know that it's a question at the heart of the discussion of democracy, and people like Tony Negri, for example, think that this is the contemporary revolutionary project to capture, to claim, to divert, to appropriate the commons that already exist. Somehow we produce a lot of things that can be classified as commons, but they are grabbed by public and private bodies. So the claiming process is a constituent process. So we are reappropriating and reinventing something there, and I think this undertaking needs new categories, new institutions, new forms of management and governance, and certainly new spaces and actors, and somehow a new sort of infrastructure. And I think we as architects, and I'm speaking now in my name, but also there are lots of architects in the room, we can do something. I think we have an important role to play in setting up. We have the knowledge also in setting up such infrastructure for commons. And this was also, some of our intention when we started Rurban in 2008, which was thought as a strategy, as an open source framework for urban regeneration that will be bottom up and will be rooted in everyday life practices and in commons practices, I would say, bringing new forms of governance. And I think we understood it also as a learning place because, it was an experiment. And we were hoping that through this experiment we will learn about, how to set up a resilient neighborhood. And the principles of Rurban are, and I think that this vision about how to do such a, regeneration for resilience comes from an architect perspective. So we were thinking that architecture and building could be at the core of this strategy. So we imagine the possibility of having a number of civic hubs, commons, that will drive this economic, social, and ecological change, and they will be diverse in terms of program. They will cover more or less the main functions, housing, production, culture, and the neighborhood was the right scale to start with, because this is the scale that I would say has a sort of ecological agency and also a social agency, because people can directly access all these resources and they can know each other, so they can be agents of change, and all these functions were meant to, I would say, to be explored in these hubs that were meant to provide space, resources for training, also support for social and ecological stakeholders to emerge. And the other principle was that they will work as a network, and this network will be materialized through these ecological loops. So in such a way that they are not only working in isolation, but they are connected through exchanges that are sometimes material or immaterial. Waste, for example, is produced in the housing, and that can be recycled in one of the recycling units, and so on. So also we were thinking that not only new facilities have to be created, but also existing facilities or spaces can be reinterpreted, and can, as well as existing practices, can be plugged into the network and work together and bring their own components. So all this would conduct at the end that balancing somehow locally consumption and production, reducing carbon emission, and encouraging at the end the whole neighborhood to live and work more ecologically. And also, I would say, would encourage also a very diverse type of stakeholders to buy into. And with this strategy in mind, we contacted a number of municipalities in the suburban cities in Paris, and also we thought that the suburb is a sort of strategic place to start, because there is land opportunity much more than in the city center, and you have more diversity, and all these things that are usually considered as negative, like unemployment, or let's say land misuse can be resources in such strategy. And of course, Colombes was at that time a municipality that was willing to try the implementation of this. So we found, we applied for European money, and Public Works was also one of the partner in this application. So we obtained almost 1 million from Europe to set up the strategy parallelly in Colombes and in Hackney Wick. Hackney Wick was more of, I would say, more modest somehow in terms of, we imagined just one hub in Hackney Wick and 3 hubs in Colombes. And the hubs were somehow negotiated with those that we have identified as possible stakeholders at that time. So we mapped a number of organizations, and we realized that maybe 3 hubs, and there were also 3 land opportunities for temporary occupation to start with. So one was an urban agriculture hub, another was and we started with Agrocité, which was situated in the core of social housing estate. And we knew that the land will be available for approximately 10 years. So we thought about a strategy for, let's say, mid-term occupation. And we conceive it as a space where food can be produced and people can learn how to produce food, because there were 3 types of gardens that were that we imagined. One which would be an experimental farm, a micro farm, another community garden, and another a pedagogical garden, so for different types of user, with the idea that there will be things that will be exchanged between them, but also there were cultural facilities and a sort of processing spaces, so cooking and a collective mini market. Again, thinking about the possibility of having not only participating in these neighborhood circuits, but also having internal circuits, as for example, recycling the water, completely producing energy. And all this, I think, were very important also in the process of learning, because people need to see. I think the architecture has this quality, this, I would say, force to make things visible, to make things tangible, real. And I think we found out through the process that it did work very well. So we started with the community garden. So the community garden had a strategic role to bring people together when nothing is there, when you can't show them drawings. You have to give them the possibility of doing something that makes sense for them immediately. And then this was how we started. And also, we didn't start to build anything before having the first sowing. I mean, it was a preparation time, but it was important for people to appropriate the project and to kind of start to see, what is the benefit of having, all these are people that are not ecologically literate. Yeah, that, ecology doesn't make any sense for them. And I think it was very important to little by little take them on this journey. So this is in 2013 when we have inaugurated the facility. After the first sowing, then as I say, then we have reused material for the construction. Some of them were local materials. And also, we have imagined it, to be in the service of the garden also, with spaces for preparation, and with a shop and a mini market open to the city. We were collecting the rainwater underneath, so this would be utilized in the garden. We were also filtering the gray water. So this is how it looked after 2 years. The Race Club was the other one in a quite different situation, because we occupied an existing road that was closed, and it was interesting to see also this typology of space that can be reoccupied, that can be reclaimed, because it doesn't have another any other use. And again, with the same principles of reducing carbon emission. And we had other constraints here, because there were all these services going underneath. So we had to have a construction system that can be dismantled in 48 hours. So that's why we use prefabricated stuff, and also reclaim containers. But also try to have ecological principles in the construction of it. So there were production, workshop spaces at the ground level, and creation spaces at the upper level, where we had also residency for eco-designers, a sort of, kitchen and, working spaces. But what was the most important is, in the process of learning, I would say, is to understand the step within the process of, of governing this space, and how to set up collective governance in a project which, grows bottom up, but also has mediators, as we were. We started with these decision-making sessions that were very early on. And lots of people that came at these sessions maybe didn't continue until the end, but it was important because this set up a momentum of a series of meetings where also a sort of affiliation to the project was established. These were about establishing, the possible circuits in the area, identifying. So we invited a series of specialists that will work with the core group of stakeholders around the important issues that were determinant. These were moments of interaction with students, for example, and other specialists. There was a designer, and there was the studio that I, that time, taught with Andreas in Sheffield, coming and designing products for the gardeners, that useful products. And other types of learning were this repair workshops, where those that have some knowledge, some expertise, even if it's amateur, can benefit others. Yeah. So again, iteration of about this, mutual learning moments where specialist or local expertise is shared in all areas, and little by little there were local entrepreneurs that have emerged, and within a sort of diverse economic set, because not all of these enterprises were somehow lucrative. So there were lots based on gift economy and on sharing. And I think it was very important for us to nurture and to support this diversity. And this is a quite a nice story, which is, Yvonne, who was passionate about worm compost. He used to do it in his house, and we built for him a compost wormery, and he continued. He developed a compost school, and he managed to accreditate it. So he's forming now. He's educating compost trainers that can work with municipalities in different, around Paris, and they have jobs. So that I think he trained 160 compost masters. Benoit is one of them, so he's really living now after this, and these are the other entrepreneurs that have emerged. And also we put together, economic models that are more commons-based, in which, whatever is let's say, gain within the project has a part which is reinvested in the common economy. And all this together, kind of made an interesting, value table in which we show, what is the value of such a project. These were the partners that were also international and local, and I think that this way of weaving the network, the support network of a project is very important. And after this, we had lots of interest from other municipalities, so we are now in the process of developing urban network in different municipalities, to also inventing a structure that will be able to keep all this together There is also Urban in London, which also has the potentiality of expanding. But there were lots of challenges, and I won't go into all of them because I don't have time. But one which was very important was the relation with power and with politics, and I think that this is something that one should not ignore, because I think that the Commons project is a political project. And even if we do not maybe understand it as such, the others are understanding it. So we, at the local elections, we enter into this big conflict with a new municipality team, which was, has changed political color, so from left passed to right. And it was even worse because the person that became a mayor was a former mayor before. She had a very different, I think, agenda, and she's maire bâtisseur, as we say. So she's completely into the developing networks, and her husband is a developer, and so on. So she would look at this land, which was occupied by these strange things, where people are not under control, as real estate opportunities. So she asked us to leave. So she has threatened us with evictions. We had a process, a case in court. So we made a lot of campaign around this, and there are lots of things that have been published even in The Guardian. So it took us a year and a half to get through all the processes. We had protests, a petition, lots of people signed, because it was obvious she would claim the land to develop temporary parking. I mean, as a pretext, of course, of claiming back the land. And we went, we lost the appeal in the Cour de Cassation, which was, I think, the last legal possibility that we had to keep the land. And at the end, we decided to relocate it in a neighboring municipality, because the neighboring municipality is a communist municipality. The mayor was very interested in having this facility in a sort of similar estate, and so we put in place a process of relocation, but the mayor, just sent the police, and then they have savagely demolished it, without even waiting for a few more weeks for it to be relocated. We have yet the material to reconstruct it, but it will be very difficult. I think it's however important to know that these places are today not secured. I think there is no legal support for such type of spaces, and we have to be aware of this. I mean, we can learn. Also, I think the process of learning would include also to learn from failures and from this maybe if we should have known that this would be the risk, we would have prepared it much better beforehand. I think the leases and all this could have been much more solid. And I think we have, when the laws do not protect us, I think we have the possibility, the necessity, I would say, to do research about how to do it, and also to create jurisprudence, to create precedents that one can refer to. And I think our role was to create such precedents. But of course, we hope that we can still develop, whatever network, even if one of the nodes of the network has failed temporarily. Thank you. So there are no questions.
And then we do questions on the panel. Yeah. Okay, where did we save yours?
So if I click this on,
you,
so static.
so if you plug that in, you need to make sure the aerial is not activated. I'm just going to plug that in. This is your clicker.
Cool.
And then, what is your presentation? No, that's not it. This one. So just check the first slide. Perfect.
Looks fine. Right. Hi, everybody. My name is Willem Halfman. I work in the Netherlands at the moment. I'm afraid my story is completely different, comes from the other angle, looks from the perspective of universities. So I'm not involved in some of these activist local projects, even though I've tried to in the past, and I'm not managing at the moment. And the main point of my story is going to be to explain why, for a lot of people at universities, even though we would like to get involved, it is so hard to get involved. Part of my story is going to be complaining, as academics often do. And the complaining bit is going to be based on an article that I wrote with my colleague and friend Hans Rader a couple of years ago called The Academic Manifesto. And this is the starting sentence from it. The university has been occupied not by students demanding a say as in the 1960s, but this time by the many-headed wolf of management. And if that sentence reminds some of you of a middle of the 19th century other manifesto, then this comparison is entirely intentional. So the first bit is going to be about complaining. That is this wolf that has taken over universities. I'll try to describe it without getting too technical. It goes under this heading of new public management. So the new public management is not new, it's not particularly public, and it's very bad management. But I'll try and describe roughly what it's like. What I do in the first bit is complain, as I said, just like a lot of people before me are complaining. In fact, academic complaining is turning into a little bit of a literary genre. This is just a pile of books that I've collected from the Netherlands, but also from the UK, the various places, a lot of stuff from the US as well, complaining about the state of universities. And one that I'll be referring to later on is Collini's book, What Are Universities For?, which I think is a very interesting question, but not one he answers particularly well. So I'll try to do better. So the point of the manifesto is we complain a lot, but it's time for activism, because all of this complaining is basically just shrugged off by management as just another way of complaining by these academics. They always complain, so we're very quickly neutralized. What do we complain about? What is this wolf like? Well, new public management's got a number of characteristics, and I'll try to just quickly grab them under 4 big headings. The first one is the idea of excellence, and the idea that you can treat universities as business units, and if you have them compete with each other, then they will get better. This is one expression of it from, in this case, Hungary, the Ministry of Human Resources, and where people are considered as resources for your economy, and you need to manage these resources well, and then you have to do that in an excellent university, and if you can prove that you are excellent, then you get a little bit of extra money. Of course, the key issue is, how do you measure excellence? How do you define excellence? And that's the bit about the new public management, where the public aspects, very subtle ways gets rubbed out and gets made into something very technical. So that's one characteristic of it. Competition for excellence often has the opposite effect. So, for example, when a university manages to be excellent and then draw a lot of students, as the logic says, typically what will happen to the quality of education at that university is it will go down, because the infrastructure can't cope with extra students, the teachers can't cope with the influx of extra students. So issues like that are typically not considered in this excellence stuff. The other thing is the complete fetishism with indicators. This is just some random graph of indicators that Dutch universities happen to be completely obsessed with. The number of publications, and all these graphs, of course, always have to go up. The more they go up, the better it is. Numbers of publications, right? So they're very proud of this, the fact that these lines go up, but actually what is happening is that academics are becoming better and better at producing exactly this kind of output. You want them to produce lots of publications, well then the publications get shorter and will produce more and more of the same. will recycle publications. And in fact, we just discovered that, for example, in Dutch economics, about 1 in 7 scientific publications produced by Dutch top economists is just recycled stuff that they've published before. Which is just pushes up these indicators. It's undermining the academic publication system in the most scandalous ways at the moment. I can give you more examples of this after the talk if you want. The other thing is the promise of efficiency. If you manage universities like this, they will become efficient. They will, use less resources, use less money. This efficiency usually means that you have to work harder, and you have to work harder in precarious, flexible, as they call it, conditions. This is the Faculty of Theology and Philosophy at the Free University of Amsterdam. This is what it looks like. These are all flexible workspaces, as they call it. The philosophers and theologians are no longer allowed to have a bookshelf in the background because the next day somebody else is going to move in. So books have basically been banished. There's a bookshelf here in the corner. You have about this much book space to store your stuff. It doesn't even look like a university anymore. So the net effect is that the staff just basically doesn't come anymore. They stay at home where they have the stuff that they work with, which is their valued books. Right? So it's not the kind of culture that respects the kind of work that academics do, and especially the diversity of what academics do. This may be a good environment for some academics, but for theologians and philosophers, it's kind of weird. Fourth, the promise of economic salvation. If you manage your universities like this, what you will get is a machine. On the one hand, one side of that machine, like this conveyor belt, you will put in people. On the other side, you will produce resources for your economy, trained people. And if you put in enough money through this machine, on the other end of the machine, you'll get publications and innovations, the kind of stuff that will keep your economy going. It's like a conveyor belt. And this is destroying a lot of the diversity of academic culture and the way we manage things, and it's also making it increasingly impossible to cooperate in the kind of projects that are presented here, because the kind of projects that are presented here do not generate enough money and do not generate enough publications. And even if we can cooperate, we can only cooperate if it generates research grants and if we can use it to grab data and then co-publish about you. It's a very one-sided relation. So if you have trouble with academics dealing in these kinds of projects, it's because they are forced to work in these kinds of machines. Now, what this machine of the university has done is it basically has privatized the public university. Now, over the last couple of years, after we wrote this manifesto, which went to my really big surprise because we wrote it about Dutch universities, and then we got responses from all over the world. And people said like, oh yeah, this is exactly what is happening in our country, really from various corners of the world. And it's been translated in 6 languages now. I was really stunned at how much response we got, how many people recognize this dark image of the university. But in the years after, there's been a lot of protests in various places. This is the University of Amsterdam, 2015, where students occupied the main building of the university to sort of reclaim the university against this machine-like treatment that they were experiencing. And notice some of the slogans, and by the way, they are in English, because by now even the University of Amsterdam has become so international, because they try to attract students from everywhere. You get English slogans like direct democracy is what they claim. A lot of the slogans also are formulated in a negative way, a negative tense. For example, here is 1 year before, the Free University of Amsterdam, the other Amsterdam University, and the slogan says, the university is not a production factory. A student is protesting here, and what they called it was the cookie factory, because students were saying increasingly, you are treating us like cookies. We go through the same cookie cutter, we're all the same, we go through the machine, we train in 4 years or 5 years, and we have to be on time. You're treating us like cookies. And that was the slogan of their protest, both students and staff. This is UCL, right? 2015, not the most eloquent political slogan, but say no to measuring academic staff with outcomes. But it's the same logic. It's a staff protesting against this idea that they are being assessed by the number of publications or whatever outcomes they produce. They don't get inputs and then say, like, you're professionals, we trust you to do valuable stuff and explain it to us. No, you get assessed by outcomes, by producing products. This is Myanmar, one of the worst dictatorships in the world, where students went out onto the street to say, We are students, not customers. That's basically risking your life, right, in a dictatorship to do that. But isn't that bizarre that this model of managing universities and the resistance against this has spread as far as countries like Myanmar? And when we wrote the manifesto, we got responses from Eastern Europe, and people in Eastern Europe were saying Sarajevo, Budapest. The European Commission is making us organize our universities along according to this model. It's part of becoming part of the European Union and becoming modern. They're imposing this. So they used this as a means of protest. And we were surprised that this model had spread this far. So what I want to do is use the idea of a commons to try and develop an alternative model, to stop saying we are against outcome measurement, we are against this and against that, and try and formulate some sort of positive model for what kind of university we actually want. And I think the commons is a really good inspiration for that. As a metaphor of the commons, I want to use the metaphor as the commons of the common lands. That is a model that's developed in the Middle Ages. It's not some ancient model that has existed forever. It was a specific model for managing common lands developed in a specific point in time with specific rules. It's not about just go and use whatever you want. There were rules about it. There's a community around it that manages it. That idea of a commons. And with that sort of almost agricultural metaphor, I hope that we can take universities from something like this, where, you know, it's just like serial production of the same cookies or tomatoes or whatever, to something that looks more like this. Sorry, come on. Yeah. You know, a wild garden where you accept that there's a little bit of weed, something that looks more like permaculture than production greenhouses. Now, people will say, but, you know, in a garden like this, there will be wastage. There will be some herbs and some things that will be growing there which won't be useful. And that's true. But what they're forgetting is that the new public management style of measuring everything generates a lot of overhead as well. It generates an enormous bureaucratic apparatus to keep tracks and keep tabs on everybody, academics both and students. And it creates wastage as well because people start to produce waste to produce according to the indicators. So it's not as if the current system we have is so efficient, is so optimal. Now, I'm trying to think of examples of knowledge commons practices like open access publication and all that, and there's all kinds of things to be said about that. And if you have ideas about that, please let me know, because I'm looking for good examples of commons ways of managing a university. But what I want to do now is not so much give you examples, because I think some of the examples we hear here are much better than the examples I can come up with. But what I want to do is try and develop a different story about what universities are for. Because at the moment, the main explanation of what a university is for is it's good for your economy. It generates knowledge and innovation, and it's good for your economy. And we need a better story than that. So I want to return to that question of Collini, what are universities for, and try and articulate a different kind of answer. What do universities do and why are they here? And I want to articulate the answer to this question in a way that's more public and that addresses public concerns more, that fits a commons kind of way of thinking more, rather than it's good for your economy, or in addition to it's good for your economy, rather. So, and here's the shortest phrase I've managed to come up with so far. If you can make it even stronger, then please let me know. But this is the best wording I've found so far. Universities make, preserve, and pass on knowledge for the common good. That's what we do, basically. And we do this by collecting 4 kinds of knowledge. That is existential knowledge about who we are, knowledge that helps us to solve problems, knowledge that signals trouble, and yes, also knowledge that supports innovation. I think that's the core of what universities, well, it's normative, so let me say should do. And that's acknowledging their economic function. So let's start with some examples of the first, existential knowledge. So I'm not talking about scientific method, right? I'm not talking about some sort of essence of science or whatever. I'm trying to reformulate it in such a way that from the beginning, from the basic, connects universities to social concerns, to society. And then you might think, okay, existential knowledge, that sounds really abstract. That sounds like the kind of stuff that only academics are interested in. That sounds like the kind of stuff that astronomers will do. Where do we come from in the universe? Very basic. How is that going to help us? But actually, if you think about it, this kind of stuff fascinates us, all of us citizens, because we watch it all the time on TV. It's hugely popular. You know, think of Morgan Freeman or The Sky at Night or whatever, right? So it is an esoteric question, but it is an esoteric question that us as citizens, that it fascinates us all the time. Just like we go to natural history museums or we go to, right? There are aspects of science that are obviously not purely of economic benefit, but that still are of big social relevance. And that's not just about the universe, it's also about culture, whether it's old culture or more recent culture. Universities are one of those places, one of those archives in a society where our culture, our identity is being reproduced, studied, analyzed, and preserved. It's where your language gets passed on, for example. And especially in the Netherlands, where universities are increasingly turning towards English in an attempt to attract more international students, the preservation of local culture is becoming painful, becoming problematic. So that's the first one. Existential questions about who we are, where we come from, where we are going, what is our place in the universe, and those scientific questions may sound esoteric, but they interest a lot of people. See science on TV. Second one, solve problems. And then the one that usually people come up with is medical problems, right? So science helps us to improve our health. Yes, that's true. But science also helps us to improve other kinds of problems. So for a while ago, I was involved in a project in Indonesia, which also had public sanitation involvement, like the project that was presented yesterday. This is pollution by the textile industry in Bandung, Indonesia. In the background there, there's textile factories. Here are rice paddies, and the effluent from the textile factories goes straight into the rice paddies. So that's the kind of problem where academics can help. If you give them some space, if you allow them to do so, they have ideas about how to improve this, what kind of technology to bring in, how to organize people, right? But if you're going to insist that it only is possible if we generate money and generate money in the next couple of years, then you basically are tying our hands to help with these kinds of problems. So some of these problems get a lot of money, like medical research, other kind of problems. It's much harder for us to get money, but still we could help. Think along. So universities are also here to help fix problems. And then signal problems, like this lady, Rachel Carson, at a certain point saying, you know, our birds are dying because of organochlorine pollution. Even though we don't want to hear it, universities are those kind of places where you have an assembly of people who tell you stuff that you don't want to hear. And that's exactly what you need every now and then in a society. Hear stuff that you don't want to hear. New upcoming trouble, like climate change, for example. Who else is going to warn us for climate change if we're going to insist that everything is to be valuable for the economy in the next 4 or 5 years in the short-term economic thinking? So, yes, solve problems, look ahead, signal new problems. That's also what universities do. And then lastly, yes, okay, universities should contribute to innovations. But if you look at how they do this, and if you look at concrete examples of how universities contribute to even technological innovation like this, it's not as if universities are the source of basic research that then translates maybe 20, 30 years down the line to applications. More often than not, companies will go to universities and say, look, we found something, could you help us figure it out? Could you help us improve this thing? So a lot of innovation goes out there in society. It doesn't spring from universities. Universities help study, preserve, and pass on these innovations. And they don't have to be all technological innovations like new light bulbs. Here's another form of innovation, the social innovation. What about this one? The new form of communication that was suggested by the Occupy movement. So we could study this too. We could help with this too. How could you improve these kinds of non-verbal communications in large crowds with a horizontal kind of communication rather than hierarchical communication? So we support innovation, study innovation, right? But not as the beginning, not always at the beginning of a production line, but as a partner in knowledge. So how do we do this? All kinds of different things. There's an enormous diversity of stuff that goes on at universities, but at the end, universities are more like organically growing public archives, which maybe doesn't sound so sexy. It doesn't sound like, you know, the growth engine behind, or the engine behind economic growth, or the engine behind innovation. We're organically growing public archives, but I think that's much closer to what we are, and much more useful and a much more public way to think about universities than the alternative. Something like this: a node in the network of knowledge in society, a potential partner, but then we need a management model that allows this and that doesn't tie our hands or actually sells us out to just one node in that network, which is companies. That's my story. Thank you.
And now, Marco. Is that good for you? Yeah, that's fine. And do you want to walk around? Yeah. Yeah, so move for that. I think it's on the outside, so the aerial's unsure. Okay. So it makes a difference to the sound quality, apparently. Okay, and then let's just find it.
Just here, right?
Yeah, just click through.
Okay. So my name is Marco. I'm the co-founder of Prinzessengarten in Berlin. It's an urban garden project. I was rescheduled just to explain because I have to catch a plane from the last panel to this one, but I can also speak about the commons. Yeah, Prinzessengarten is an urban agriculture project. Within the scene, it's quite well known. We exist since 2009 on 6,000 square meter in the very center of Berlin. I will not talk so much about this project. We heard yesterday also about gardens in London and about how they contribute to building communities, to exchange knowledge, empower people, and so on. This is just that you have an impression. So it's a very exposed, quite big place where we grow vegetables and we sustain ourselves with our own income created by, for example, a bar and a restaurant. And of course, this place, one of the major purposes is creating and exchanging knowledge around different topics that come with growing food, like how to grow organically, how to do compost, how to recycle, reuse materials, how to foster biodiversity in the city, keeping bees, all these kind of things that are related to a more sustainable form of living within the city. But as I said, I will not go too deeply into this. But I will try to talk about another project that we started 2 years ago called Neighborhood Academy. And it arose in a way out of also some sort of a learning process doing a project like Prinzessengarten. As Doina already mentioned, you start something like this, you're very enthusiastic, you create a community, but sometimes then you learn that the fundament of what you're doing is missing, especially when other interests come into the picture, like political interests or economic interests. So what we were facing in Berlin in 2012 was also the threat of being evicted because this land is publicly owned where we started the garden, but the city of Berlin privatized a lot of things, including real estate. So we were in the situation where we had to deal with this kind of situation that is not related to gardening. And to deal with this kind of relation, you don't learn how to deal with it in a garden doing composting, but doing composting helps you to see how important it is to create different ideas of what the city should look like who can engage and form the city, but still, in a political process or in a legal process, you definitely need different sources or different forms of knowledge. So this is one of the reasons why we started the Neighborhood Academy. Another reason is if you start to garden in the city and dealing with the issue of food, you cannot help it but question sooner or later the whole food system. And you ask yourself question, how can it be that this industrial processed food is so cheap when actually growing food takes so much work? And you ask all sorts of questions about the exploitation of humans and the nature, and the whole thing becomes to you pretty weird. Why are we depending on a system that is obviously not working? But you have to learn a different approach also centrally to food production to actually become really critical about it. I mean, it's easy to say the system is not working. It's easy to say it's doomed to fail. But if you deal with actual soil, with worms and plants and seeds and sun and water, you have a different knowledge. So it's not just about, the knowledge commons is, I think, also about re-evaluating what knowledge means and maybe also giving other forms of knowledge higher priority. Central knowledge, local knowledge, community knowledge, knowledge of traditional knowledge, for example, in the framework of farming. So also Sonja's daughter, who is an artist, also working in Prinzessengarten since the very beginning. And we started to thought about a new institution of learning outside the institutions of learning, because we had the feeling that these institutions fail us in providing us with this kind of knowledge. So because we had the feeling that everybody knows about the issues that we have with climate change, with social inequality and so on. But when we go to these institutions that are supposedly there to solve these problems, they don't even raise the question. So we thought we need new institutions of learning and also new methods to be able to raise these questions and bring, for example, artists into the game and local communities. And that's how we started the idea of the Neighborhood Academy, which is meant as a platform for people to exchange, for initiatives, for activists, for artists, for farmers, to have a place, a space where they can express the issues or share their experiences and so on. And it's an experiment. I mean, we are convinced that we need this kind of new institutions outside the institutions, especially in the long run. But of course, it's very difficult to build it up, to maintain it, and so on. You have all these issues that were already mentioned yesterday with resources, conflict, time, money, and so on. But we're trying, and what we did, I just give you a few examples. So what we did, for example, is starting to build our own building, which is called Die Laube in German. It's the Arbor in English, which is a process with students, volunteers, apprentices to collectively build a building out of wood from the region. I mean, and we're working with architects for years to find an architecture that is not just a building, but something that you create together. Then we're doing a project about digital commons, local digital networks with partners all over Europe. One is actually in the audience from Bedford Creek, James. A very interesting project, and James can tell you much more about it than I. But it's also about how can we create the infrastructure, how can we take back the infrastructure that is appropriated by big companies, global politics, and so on. In this case, the internet. And one of the answers here is we have to rebuild it on a local community basis. And we tried to frame this process with the term collective learning, meaning that, so we saw in a lot of different initiatives and projects that there is knowledge produced. And it's a completely different form of knowledge that you will find in a school or a university or at your workplace. For example, you learn how to politically organize yourself, how to express yourself, how to organize a community, how to deal with conflict, or at least expressing conflict and try to deal with it. And we said maybe it's time to think about learning not just as an individual activity, but to bring together different organizations and initiatives and places to learn from each other. So we created, for example, a residency program for 1 year where we invited projects from other places to work together with initiatives in Berlin on specific topics. For example, 596 Acres from New York working with an initiative in Berlin on a process of mapping the commons, and by doing so also learning how they deal with this issue in New York, what kind of methods they use, and so on. So we were bringing like methods from New York into Berlin neighborhoods and also testing how do they work, how do people react, and one of them was putting signs on places saying this belongs to all of us, and see how people react, inviting them to use it. For example, Prinzessinnengarten, which is a place that is only secured for 2 more years. So raising these issues by putting signs there and also giving access to, for example, the people who are in charge in the political system legally and so on. Another thing that we are also very eager to do is to or let me put it in a different way. We think, like, from what we're doing, we're working on social and ecological issues, or social and ecological justice. What we experience by doing so is that the rural or the countryside is kind of the blind spot of our life, of our culture, of the way we do research. So we're talking, for example, with a lot of urbanists and architects and planners that research what we're doing, and they never once raise the issues of what's our relation to the countryside, even though in an urban garden or farm you would say there is an obvious question here to be discussed. So we say we have to go back to the places where food is actually produced. We have to look closer at our dependency of on these places, on the people working there, on natural resources and ecosystems. And what we did was with Brad Bloom from Chicago, using artistic methods in addressing this issue. So we were traveling in the countryside and having interviews and talks to farmers and people in the countryside, and making a manual about what we learned from the people being engaged. And so when we framed the Neighborhood Academy, we were also convinced that we're not talking about neighborhoods today or in the future that are just defined by physical proximity. So our neighbors in a globalized world are not necessarily just the people living around us. Our neighbors are people who face the same issues and might come up with the same methods or ideas how to deal with them. So also from personal experience, I mean, artists do this a lot, or researchers, they travel around in the world, they're quite privileged to do so, and then they meet other people and they can connect to them because, you know, we face the same global system. You can name it capitalism or whatever you want, but there's rules and dynamics that are more or less the same everywhere, with local, of course, different local outcomes, and people who resisted in different forms. So, for example, that's why we invited people from the Brazilian community in Berlin to, that's just one example, to make visible the protests in Rio against the Olympic Games and against the gentrification process that is quite violent. But of course we can relate to this because we had the same thing in Berlin, and then we saw what was happening in London. So it's important, I think, to create this this global neighborhoods to see that we're all sitting in on the same planet and deal with the same things. It's just another example that I just, a random picture I took 2 days ago in Hackney Wick. That could be also Berlin-Kreuzberg. I mean, it's perfectly the same situation that we have to deal with. And since the financialization of capitalism is a global phenomenon and it strikes every local community everywhere, we have to find forms to be as global as the forces that we have to deal with. Yeah, and we use different methods, of course, in exchanging knowledge. Typically workshops. Here we made designs for the Commons projects. We work with artists. This is Michelle Terran. She worked with the housing movement in Spain with the PA and invited initiatives from Berlin to show publicly the way they dealt with issues in forms of manifestos and posters and so on. Daniel from also Brazil, who made a mural about expulsion in Berlin, but also in Brazil, trying to show also that we're quite connected also to indigenous people that are thrown off the land so that we can have access to cheap food or whatever kind of resources. And we try to also go out in the city. In this case, we walked to another contested space that's supposed to be privatized, where a community tries to resist this process. And we have talks. Of course, our classroom is a garden. It's when the sun is shining. It's also a different way to talk and to interact. I mean, you can compare this building and what it stands for is also framing how we deal with each other. So it's also a difference if you go out into a garden, being exposed. In this case, it was at least sunny. We have film screenings and so on. So, yeah, as I said, this is an idea we had. It's a fluctuating group of people who are investing into this. It comes with all sorts also of vulnerability, instability, and so on. For example, for the moment, we don't have any funding. People have the tendency to have less and less time because also like the economy forces us individually to change the way we live. So we addressed this yesterday. To work on a volunteer basis in civil society is something that becomes more and more complicated. And in the future, I think we cannot base what we're doing on this kind of ideas. And yeah, the land issue is also coming, or is a constant problem for Prinzessengarten. So now we have 2 years left. And every year we are there, the speculative value of the land is 1 million more, basically. And of course, this changes what you're dealing with. But as I said, I think it's important now to have also long-term goals. That's why we're saying also, when it comes to sustainability, we don't trust this term, of course, anymore, because everybody is using it. But when it comes to sustainability, we have to at least talk about a lifetime. And the responsibility for us to give over to somebody else what we started doing. So if it's not 50 or 60 years, we should really think about if it's worthwhile doing it. But what I also experience, even if projects fail, it's also like seeds, you know. People are involved, they learn to express things, they learn to organize, they learn to communicate. And yeah, the most amazing people I met are actually had this kind of alternative PhD, let's say, in local or community projects. Yeah, I would finish with this. No, it's okay. Yeah.
I'd now like to invite the panel to join Anna Bettencourt and we'll open the discussion to the floor. Yeah, no, it's okay. I think we just take this one. to share that mic, and I'll go around the audience with that one.
So do we have the issue of the little ones?
No, we just need that one. Do you want to start with the mic? Do you want to... Yeah? Yeah, sure. Is it on? Use this one? Try that one.
This one? Yes. Well, thank you very much. It was both great inspiration to listen to the three of you, but also, even though you're coming, perhaps Doina and Marco coming more from similar background, nevertheless, I think Doina also has a background in academia, working currently as well. Hello?
I think it's try again.
Okay.
Yeah.
But for me and for many of us, perhaps, that are within universities or within schools or teaching, I think what you brought up, Wolfgang, Willem, is so important, because to understand what actually are the forces and the mechanisms that are behind what currently is happening in universities is very important. Not to just see it as a fait accompli, something that we have to learn to live with, but rather that this is a very strong ideology behind that is, public management is a certain way of understanding the world, understanding economy. And I think what we all here are discussing and what the three of you have in common is not only how do we produce other models, but also something that you all three addressed, which is the fundamentals that actually produce the difficulties in these alternative models to continue to develop and to survive, in the case like in Colombia. So perhaps my comment to start with is not so much of a question, but rather if you would like to add something more, and I would also very soon like to open the floor to the audience, because I'm sure there are many questions and curiosity. So, sorry I said your name wrong. But, so is there anything you would like to add to your presentations, or that it has strike you while listening to each other's, that you can find commonalities or issues that we would like to comment on?
Just very briefly, I think the more I listen to these stories, the more I think the parallels strike me at how something that is public, or that is something that we share as a common resource, commons rather than public space. Well, anyway, our commons, and how quickly they get privatized, they get enclosed. Yeah? Whether it's a garden or a university or whatever, somehow we seem there's all these mechanisms that privatize them, and that say no, it's only you, and only under certain conditions, and only if there's money involved, then you can go to university, have a garden, have a public space. So the parallels strike me as important, and something that we can learn from, I hope.
I think the question is, of course, what to do. I mean, can we continue in the same way? And I think this is a question that we are sharing with Mark. We have discussed a lot about this. How to scale up, how to learn from the situations, to resist enclosure better. Because enclosure is, becomes extraction, it becomes more and more aggressive, and have this alternative. Do they have a future? Will they disappear if things are continuing in the same way? I think for us, one of the conclusions would be what I have tried to present at the end, these alliances that we need to make, not only across the same kind of initiatives, but also across different levels, university allied with, community projects, with a sort of political agency. I think we have to be aware that, they are not neutral, so we are already working towards, as Negri said, maybe the new revolutionary project. There are many ways of doing it, but I would say that for me this would be the priority. And, I don't know if others have other ideas about or other concerns about this issue of scaling and, becoming more powerful somehow.
Yes, Taranj.
I suppose one thing I find really interesting is, and it's kind of come out of all of it, is this idea of the individual student that produces individual outputs for individual gain, and then they go out and do their individual, it's kind of part of that competition excellence. No? So it's also the values with which they leave, or so it's actually them, what values are being instilled in them. So somehow it's not about also just the content of what is being taught. It's also the type of person that is being produced as part of this system. And so that, in a way, becomes, I think I find that quite interesting when you talk about their relationship to the world. And so that maybe would be interesting to hear what you might think, how you might be thinking that could be addressed, also within the institution, because that's quite radical to say you will not have an individual mark and an individual output, but you will have a collective one, and how do you do that?
Yeah, well, I would like to address maybe this because, and also somehow some questions that I had when you did your presentation, because the question again is, we understand that these things are happening, but what to do, and can we tactically act also inside the institutions? Can we work towards, these other formats that, might have an incredible impact in terms of the future, as for example, promoting, collective projects. And I think Namik would remember our struggle at Harvard to promote a collective platform in an institution that is known and respected for its individual excellence. And also there are other institutions like in Sheffield, and again I think there are a few students from Sheffield, where for many years we have tried to promote collective production and to recognize it in the curriculum, but there are small steps and that one can start with. The question is how to build up, how to also as academics, can we more strategically unite and go in the same direction, collaborate, have this parallel structure that don't need to be declared as such, but they can work effectively for promoting different models. And I know that Anand might have also things to add to this, and some of us also have particular roles in this institution and can influence and resist from these roles the model which is imposed upon us.
Hello. I have a question to Wilhelm. I like it very much, your presentation, but at the same time I would like to take the discussion to a level that is in a way less innocent. So when you talk about how one of the, let's say, objectives of the universities and the common is to pass on knowledge for the common good, of course, there are huge conflicts about that, and also like amazing initiatives. Some of them, they are beyond the law. For example, right now, the main platform for distributing academic papers is SkyHub, which is a project led by this woman, Alexandra Elbakian from Kazakhstan, and a group of Russian and Kazakh hackers, SkyHub. Anyone here knows about that? Okay, when you want to pay for when you want to get a paper and you don't have, let's say, credentialed by a university from the Harvard, whatever, Yale, sometimes they ask you for $45 or pounds, and then probably you don't have that money. So access to academic knowledge, mainly papers, is, let's say, not access for all. It's not democratic, and because we are in the 21st century and hackers and social engineers, they play a game and they play hard. Now there is this website called skyhub.bz that offers the biggest catalog of academic papers in the planet, through social engineering, through hacking, through many things, no? But it's making knowledge available for all without being in kind of a Western university, no? Of course, they can do it because they are in Kazakhstan and they will not be persecuted. But if we think about Aaron Swartz committed suicide also because he was persecuted by MIT. So, I think it was important to say that. But I would like to know if let's say, how do you deal, if it's part of your interest, being an institutional player, how do you deal with initiatives that are beyond the law, that will get you in trouble, for example, if you, in a way, support them? So this meant, how do you deal with these illegalities with this aim for the common good and universities? Thank you.
So what I wanted to do with the story of explaining or giving a mission for universities in a different language is obviously in itself not the big concrete act that is as subversive as the example that you gave. But I'm hoping that with just this different language, you can get a different way to talk about it, and that politicizes much more what universities are about and what they are for. If you say common good, of course, obviously common good is a highly contested notion, but at least we can contest it. At least we can argue then what is good and what a university should be doing and what is important, because right now it's being hidden under a very technocratic language. So, and I think if you talk about it in terms of a common public resource, a common good, then things like this, initiatives like this, get a language in which they can be defended. So yes, okay, it may be illegal, but at the same time, if this is the mission of a university, maybe this is closer to the mission of a university than the idea of privatized means of communication that generate ridiculous amounts of money for scientific publishers. And really, the profit rates at publishing companies are higher than in any other industries. They're similar to the pharmaceutical industry. It's obscene. So I agree, but I mean, this is just one element. I think I'm looking for examples like this of people trying to make things public, trying to make them common again, trying to steal back the things that have been stolen from us by privatizing our universities, even if they're not technically private.
So we start gathering here a manual of tactics, not only examples, but we start talking about alliances, scaling up, creating networks, seeing also how production of knowledge happens in different ways. I love the expression, a PhD of knowledge in, how did you call it? PhD in local knowledge, which tags back into what you said, Willem, about actually creating other narratives, other models of explanation and understanding what's actually happening. And what, Pablo, you just raised for question, I think is very important. Where are the loopholes and how can we use the loopholes? So does somebody keep track? So at the end of the day, we have with ourselves a little handbook? Great.
Hi. Oops, this is loud. It's a question for everybody, but to pick up on something that Marco, you said, you were talking about the challenges that you face in Berlin are shared with other communities around the world. I guess what I wanted to pick up on with that was in terms of the challenges around gentrification and soaring land values. I think those are particularly heightened in cities like Berlin and London. I live in a city called Salford in the north of England. We've had quite a lot of opportunities there to buy property, to develop more sustainable possibilities to live as artists and live creative lives there. But one of the things that I really notice when I come to London is that no one wants to move to the north of England. It's kind of like the last thing that they want to do. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that, you know, like just about this kind of flocking to these, hot spots, and what about the rest of the world? You know, there's a really big world out there that could really do with the creativity that artists bring. Question for anyone.
I think a lot about the different situation in different geographical places. But what I see is that, I mean, it's not, there's a major trend of migration on a global scale of people moving to cities. And the reason is not that they like the city life so much or it's so fantastic, but that they lack economic opportunities in rural areas. And it is partly connected to our economy and how we exploit rural areas in a completely industrialized way. So we actually destroy life opportunities in the countryside, and then people move to the city and become completely different subjects, like 100% consumers being hooked on this kind of capitalist systems. And so you don't have the individual, some have the individual choice to say we start a community somewhere else. But as a major trend, I think we have to really change the way we connect to the countryside in terms of the economy, how we grow food, how we create different values and so on. And just a practical example is, for example, is community-supported agriculture. We have to use our privilege in the city of knowledge, of networks, of even economic resources to support communities or producers in the countryside directly. And that means, I mean, this is for me also, the story of the commons is you have to step out our economical system by allowing other people to produce in a different way. And I think this is the only way that we can change the situation. And this is why I also don't like talking about gentrification so much, because I think that is also deflecting us as a term from the current that is underneath, that is actually affecting every place and person on this globe. I mean, what happens in the very center of London is directly connected to somebody who's living in the countryside in Britain or in South America. And it's the same story. So we have to connect this. And I think there will be no alternative if we don't change those situations.
Can I just add? Yeah, can I just add very short, because we also have live streaming from Umeå. I think your question in terms is very relevant also in other places that in the UK. And I would just like to emphasize on your answer, because I think it really also touches on what has been said of the invited guests, that it's so about power, it's the relationships of the power structures. Because if we're looking at Sweden and the north of Sweden, that is mostly unpopulated, at the moment what is happening is one of the biggest occupation is around a hospital for children that they want to close down, which means that we are talking of an area as a half of the UK that will not have a hospital where babies can be delivered. So it's really to do with what you said, and I think you phrased it in a much better way, but it's the same issues that underline. So it's more of what to do and how we address these issues. And another comparison is the people, the movement out of the grid in the United States, where at the moment legislation has been changed in several states, where it's forbidden to grow your garden or to actually have chickens, or to close down the electricity for people that live outside of urban areas. And also even in Detroit, that is happening on the outskirts. But it's also happening really strongly in some states in the United States. So this is a much larger issue. Sorry.
Hello. I just wanted to say, first of all, your projects sound really inspiring, and I sort of have a question regarding them. I was a street-based youth worker in Hackney, London for many years, and as I was working there, I saw the gentrification happen, but I also saw lots of really interesting projects coming up, community projects. But the young people I worked with did not relate to these projects at all, and it was like a re-alienation of them. Even though these were really inspiring projects, again, it was almost like someone else took over their space, a space that most of them had learned to say, yeah, we need to get off the streets, or just they'd learned the lingo or how to talk about themselves, while I was trying to sort of encourage them to claim the streets, but from whatever perspective they saw it. So my question to you is, how do we sort of, as coming from a certain privilege, avoid, just because we have a project that we think sounds really community-based, really encouraging, really sustainable, how do we avoid sort of a form of colonization of an area that's not ours? Does that make sense?
Well, I think, well, for us was also a very strong concern, and it was a concern for the last, I don't know, 17 years since we have started. Because we were of course aware of who we are, knowing that we had some advantages. For example, the first projects that we have started were in our neighborhood as neighbors, so it's very important to wear different hats, to not be only the specialist or the researcher that is coming from outside, but also to have some currency that you can exchange with others. And so we had two currencies. One was to be immigrants, and the other was to be neighbors, or and working in other areas where we were not neighbors anymore. I think we learn to introduce this long temporality of, building trust, to not start immediately to to do stuff, to kind of take the time to know each other, to listen to each other, and to allow also, let's say, local, leaders to emerge and to be recognized by the others, because they will be the stakeholders, they will be the ones that will take over the project that we always leave behind. So we never, we sort of initiated, do it together with them, and then they are taking it over. So this was always a rule.
I think this was raised also yesterday as an issue, and I don't have an answer to this, but it's an important question. My feeling is only that, so I don't believe anymore so much into this kind of NGO idea of we have to help others. It's very paternalistic, and it's clear by now that the segregation this society is creating on a local basis, we just cannot change this so easily. So I think we have to be much more frank about our own interests, and they're legit. I mean, as I said, we are all part of a system that is putting more and more pressure on us, even if we're middle class or not, or achieving to be middle class. So we have, I think, also legitimate interests, and we have to also be very frank about them. So I have an interest in the commons because I want to have access to specific resources. Also for maybe my kids, that I want to have them access to very specific, or to an education that helps them dealing with this kind of issues. So I think we have to a little bit reframe what we're doing away from a welfare state kind of paternalistic, we repair things in a society, to more being an example of how we can empower ourselves to do things, and then other communities, they actually have to self-organize. And just an example how this happens, for example, in Spain, the PAR, the platform for the ones being affected by the mortgages. These are people, they organize themselves because they have to deal with an existential question, being evicted from their flats. And they organize to squat places and to raise this kind of issue. And I think this is the only way to change the situation, is by people organizing themselves to deal with their own issues and politicize around it. And this cannot be done by a community project or by an NGO or a council. And that becomes very strong.
I think it was a very good question, and I remember a couple of years ago, Spivak was in a lecture, I was listening to Spivak, and she was talking how the NGOs have become, for instance, in India and Latin America, the new way of colonialism. And I think in terms of these projects is something completely else. It's about something that was raised yesterday, how we communicate, how we're not co-opted by others, how we rather also, I think Doina put it very good in a way, that how it's actually the stakeholders who are the agents that actually drive the project. And I think it's really an important question to bring with us all the time in these projects.
I think we're going to have a short break, just 10 minutes, and then the next panel on situated learning will start in should we say 25 past? We're running 5 minutes late. Thank you.